Everyone, hope you're all doing well. Hope you had a good Easter. Sorry for missing class today. Feeling a little under the weather, and with what we're covering today, I think a quick video will actually cover most of the questions that you might have. So look on Learning Suite after this video. After I film this video, I'm going to post this file, which is called example project employee. And all this does is it gives you code to create 3 tables, which are the exact same tables that I go over in another video that I'll post today. That just gives another example of importing data. But the idea is that you have a project with a project name, and you have employees that have a first name and last name, and there's a many-to-many relationship between them. So you have this intersection table in the middle here with the ID project and ID employee, and you can mark whether or not they are a manager for that particular project. So with that, just so we can all be on the same page, I went ahead and created this file that if you just click in here and click this lightning bolt, it will run the entire script and it will create the table for you and insert this data in there for you. I just want everyone to be on the same page. So what I'm going to show you today in ToolJet will help you do this last requirement here, one that uses an input from a ToolJet component. So I showed you before how to insert records and display records. I'm going to show an example with a dropdown in ToolJet, and I'm going to use these 2 queries here. So this first one, if I run this is just showing a list of projects and their project name, so pretty simple. And I'm ordering it by ID project just to make sure it's always in this order, that it doesn't come up in any other order. And then for this one, I want to show the first name, last name, and if someone is a project manager for a specific project. So I'm showing first name, and I want it to look nice, so I'm saying first name as first name with a space. Then last name with a space. Then I'm using this case, which we showed off a few weeks ago, to just, if they have one as the project manager, I want it to show project manager, otherwise team member. And here I'm just doing where the project is 2, so it's showing all the employees that are a part of project 2, and if they are a project member or just a regular team member. So in ToolJet, I'm going to want you to change this to whatever you want. To any of the other projects that could have team members or project managers on there. So with that as a background, let's jump into our example that we were working on last class. So last time we created our connection to the database. I showed you how to access a query using this queries.testall.data. That'll show the entirety of a query here. I also showed you how to insert data with this using this insert row, and I added an event handler on this button, so when you click, it runs the query insert row, which will insert a row into there. Then I also showed you that you can click refresh, which has an event handler to rerun this query, or you can put 2 event handlers on here. So just to keep this separate, I'm going to click on this tab, which by default it says profile. You could actually change any of these over here if I wanted to change it to like another example. You don't have to do this. I just want to show you how you can change anything on this tab that you want. So I'm just going to click in here, which has some default text. I'm just going to delete this. And I'm going to start out by dragging another table over here, and I'll make it small to fit into this window. Let's just fit into here, and let's also drag out some text. I'm just going to make this say show all team members of project : So I'm going to want this table to show me all the team members of a specific project. So let's start making some of these queries. Let's add a query here. I'm going to choose my data source that I created last class. So see the previous videos if you haven't done that already. I'm going to go into SQL mode, and I'm actually just going to copy this query that I'm giving you here to show the project IDs and their names. And I'm going to call this query, let's just call it a project ID name. So I'm going to create this, and also I'm going to come down here and say run this query in application load. That means when I load this application or I go to the website, it's going to run it when it starts. And when I make that change, I'm going to have to click save again so that it keeps that setting as enabled. So that's our first query here. And before we get into this table that I did, I'm actually just going to drag over this Dropdown because this is the main thing that I want to show you today. So let's put this here. And you'll see that in Dropdowns, you can select from a few different options here. And just like how we could change the data in tables by changing what appeared here, if we click into our dropdown, we can change a default value. We can have option labels. So instead of 1, I could have, I don't know, Jacob project 2, project 3. Right now that doesn't make much sense, but you get the idea. You could load things in here, but what's nice about dropdowns is that you have separate things for option labels and option values. So what this means is that when I choose project 2, for example, the value that corresponds with project 2 is 2. When I choose Jacob, the value that corresponds with Jacob is 1. So this can be nice if we're doing a query like, here, let me actually just make this called project 1, project 2, so that it makes a little bit more sense. And then let's bring in this other query here to give you an example of what that might look like. Let's say we have this query here. And I'm going to call this, let's say, team members for project. And this one, I actually am not going to run this on application load. You could, it doesn't matter that much really. But I'm going to create this just so it's saved, and then I'm going to make some changes to it. Let's see if I can pull this up so you guys can see a little bit easier. So what I want is eventually I want to have this drop down. I want to be able to click it and choose any one of the projects in my database. And then when I click it, I want to show all the team members in this table below here. So if I were to go into this table right here, we can do what we did last class and say, you know what, we want queries dot team members for project. Remember that this is case sensitive, and then I'm going to do dot data. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to run it so that it actually shows things, and there we go. So we can see the team members for right now what is project 2, except I want this project 2 to reflect changes up here. So let's say I did what we did last time when we inserted data. We can actually access the components in our ToolJet project and put it into our queries by doing components instead of 2 curly brackets. We need to access the name of it, and I actually haven't given this a name yet. You could keep it as dropdown 1, but just to keep track of things, I'm going to call this dropdown projects. So this is called dropdown projects. I'm going to go back into team members for project and make this components dot dropdown projects. And remember how in dropdown projects I could choose either a value or a label? Because I want this to be an ID of a project, and IDs are like 1, 2, and 3, I'm actually just going to keep it at value. So what this means, if I look at this little preview down here, right now it says down here where ID project equals 1. Right here it says where ID project equals components dropdown project.value. But what this means is when I have project 1 selected, the value is 1. Watch what happens when I select project 2. Watch what happens to this ID project down here. I'm going to select project 2, and we click in here again. And now it recognizes that the current value for ID project is 2. And before we make any other changes actually to this, I'm going to click in drop-down objects. I'm going to go to add an event handler, and on select, I want it to run a query, and I want it to run team members for project. So this means that when I select something, let's say project 3, the query itself is going to change. Now the query says ID project equals 3, so it brought in a new set of values. When I choose project 1, it's going to get another set of values. Or actually, is this query working? Let me see where ID project equals. Oh, you know what? I didn't save my query. That's why it was bringing in the whole thing. I just noticed that it wasn't actually changing. It's bringing in the same set, and that's because over here I didn't save, so it went back to 2. So let's type this out again. Do components dot dropdown projects dot value, and make sure you put save. Okay, let's try it now. Project 2, do it Gadman, project 1, Royce Cramphorn, awesome. Project 3. Okay, awesome. We have different ones here. Okay, so hopefully you can see how with this, because I've added a event handler, I've told it to look for the option values, how with the dropdown, how I can change what is displayed at any time that I want. But if you actually go into our data, like let me just do select, actually I already wrote out the query, it's above here. If I run here, the actual project names are these random Latin titles that I just put in from Makaroom. So I want to actually show these, and I want it that if I ever added a new project, I would like it to be able to automatically show up here. I don't want to have to type out in this Dropbox every single time that I have a new project. So what I want to do is have this dropdown populate with this query that I already saved here with the ID project name, which is this query that I just ran here. ID project name, so it shows all the project names. So a way to do this is just like how before we came in here and we did queries dot query name, which in this case is project ID dot data. So we could do that, but that's getting the entirety of the query, which in this case is 2 columns. So it has an ID and the project name. We only want the project name. So the way to get to this is actually a little bit weirder. So I'm going to post this file as well that just gives a summary of every piece of code you need to know to work with ToolJet. So we already did queries.queryname.data. We did components.componentName.value. What we're going to do here is queries.queryname.data.map. So this is just a way to grab a specific column and then map it to a variable name. And the variable name you can call anything. I'm just going to call it query for consistency's sake. So I think this is running JavaScript in the background, but you don't even need to worry about that. Just know you have to put queries, write the name of your query, which I called it project ID name, .data, .map, then do parentheses, write a variable name. I'm going to call it queries, or how about query? Like that, and then we come back here. I'm actually just going to copy this to keep it consistent. So we have query equals greater than sign, then query dot column name. So we want the specific column name. We want this because it's a label to be project name. So let's see if I did it right. If I come back out here, I might have to do it on both of these. Oh, I did not put a parentheses. Let's see if that worked. Nope, I may need to do it up here as well. There might be a mismatch. So I'm actually going to copy this in the labels and in the values. And I want the values to be the ID project. That way, what it should show, let's actually make sure it's run. Oh, that's why it wasn't showing up. I actually hadn't run it and I hadn't refreshed the page, so it hadn't run the query yet. So let's go back over here. So we have values and labels. The value is grabbing the ID. The label is grabbing the project name. So if I go to Labortus, for example, that ID is 1. So that means this query now has 1 in it. Where if I choose in Sapien, that value is 6. So now it's showing the team members on project number 6 as an example. So this is just a really nice way to populate dropdowns. And you're going to want, in this case, if you do it with a dropdown, you're probably going to want to include the ID as well as a label. In this case, it's the ID of the project and then the name of that project. And then you just use this code. I know it probably looks a little bit weird, but just remember it's like we did before. Queries, query name, .data. We add .map, we do parentheses, and then just write this thing with a query equals greater than query dot, and then this needs to match the column name that you wrote out here in your SQL code from whatever SQL that you saved and are naming right here. So, and you can see actually when I click on it, it knows that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When I click on this, it knows that these are the values of that query. It'll only know this if you've already run the query. You might even have to refresh your page for it to show up. So with that, this is just one way that this could count for using an input into a ToolJet component. You could do this multiple times, something like this. You could maybe do the opposite of this. Select a team member and then show me all the projects that they are a part of. That could also count for this. That could count for, I don't know, one of these others. If you added like a group by to it, maybe you could say count the number of queries that this is a part of. Let me show you a couple of other options. Let's say you don't really want it to appear just on the screen right here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. You could instead, let's do a modal. So you could do a modal, which just gives you a button, and then it launches another little screen right here. And within this screen, you can actually just place whole other tables. So I'm just going to make this table. Let's just have it be the same data as before. Dot data. Make sure we say dot data in there. Cool. Then what that ends up looking like is that it gives you this button. If you launch the button, then you can see some more data within it. That's another way to do it. If you were to preview this, oops, don't release. For example, it would look like this. Let's go to our another example tab. We can click Labortus, non. We can see that it's changing here. Or if you didn't want to have it always showing, you could do something like launch modal, and then it shows the data here. You could change this title like it says, etc. So there's lots of options you have within ToolJet with these different forms and layouts. Feel free to experiment with a few of them. Date picker is a good one. You could use that as an input. For example, if you're wanting to restrict it within a range of dates or something. And then I think one last thing I wanted to show is, let's just say you wanted to show one cell. Like, let's say you wanted to just show the project name in row 2. You didn't want to show a whole row, you didn't want to show a whole column, just a specific value for a specific column. And that's the last thing that I show here. It's similar to what you've already done, where you do the queries, query name, data, but you just add this 0 or 1 and a column name to it, and then you can access anything there. So for example, let's say you did, oh, I grabbed the wrong thing. I'm gonna move this just so I can access this little text box. Let's say I wanted this placeholder text to be something different. I could do queries. Let's do project ID name, dot data, and I want it to be the first row, which is 0. That's probably unintuitive, but that's how a lot of programming works, is you do 0 for the first and then you move one space, so 1, that would be the second. And then let's do the project name. Project name. Cool. So now we get Labortus as the placeholder text. If we wanted the second row, we could put 1 here. Now it's Qualm. So just another example, if you for some reason need to display a single cell's value, that's the way that you do it. So again, this is to show everything from a query. This is to put something from ToolJet back into a query. This is to get a single column from a query, like in the Dropbox. And this is to get a single cell from a query. So with those, you have all the code that you need to do your project. The hard part then is just coming up with enough queries that you can display them on your ToolJet website. So if you have any questions at all, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you with it. So thanks. See ya.